This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Let's jump right in, shall we? As the US surpasses 200,000 coronavirus-related deaths, health experts are warning of converging storms as we head into flu season while struggling with a pandemic. Plus, streaming companies have thrived over the last 6 months, but there's one platform still putting up more numbers than the rest. But first, here's what you need to know right now. A grand jury in Louisville indicted one of the 3 officers involved in the fatal shooting of Breonna Taylor on March 13th. Let's be clear about what was said today. Officer Brett Hankinson was indicted on 3 felony counts of wanton endangerment for endangering Taylor's neighbors. The other 2 officers were not indicted, and none of the officers were charged for actually shooting and killing Taylor. Wanton endangerment is a charge that carries a penalty of up to 5 years in prison. Charges or convictions of police officers in fatal on-duty shootings are still very rare. After the announcement, the Attorney General of Kentucky detailed some of the findings in the grand jury investigation. According to that investigation, it was not a no-knock warrant that led to the fatal shooting. One witness corroborated that the officers did announce themselves at the apartment. The investigation also determined that the 2 officers who fired their weapons were justified in their use of force, citing that Taylor's boyfriend shot first.
Sergeant Mattingly returned fire down the hallway. Mattingly fired 6 shots. Almost simultaneously, Detective Cosgrove, also in the doorway, shot 16 times. This all took place in a matter of seconds. In total, 6 bullets struck Miss Taylor. I think it is unlikely that there will be any additional prosecutions that come from that event itself.
The National Guard was activated in preparation for today's announcement, and the city was placed on a curfew starting at 9 p.m. Eastern tonight. Last week, Taylor's family settled with the city of Louisville in one of the largest payouts linked to a police shooting. Taylor's family got $12 million from the city, while the city did not admit to any wrongdoing. The FBI is still investigating the shooting death for possible civil rights violations. Flags are at half-staff today across the nation in honor of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. A public viewing was held in the Supreme Court. More than 100 of Ginsburg's former clerks lined the steps of the court in her honor. There was also a private ceremony with family, close friends, and the other Supreme Court justices. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or the notorious RBG as she became later known by her fans, served on the Supreme Court for 27 years.
She chose the law. Subjected to discrimination in law school and the job market because she was a woman, Ruth would grow to become the leading advocate fighting such discrimination in court. Her 483 majority, concurring, and dissenting opinions will steer the court for decades.
Ginsburg will lie in repose at the Supreme Court through tomorrow. On Friday, Ginsburg will become the first woman in history to lie in state at the U.S. Capitol. Lying in state is a tribute reserved for the most distinguished government officials and military officers, while lying in honor is a distinction given to private citizens. The president plans to pay his respects to Ginsburg tomorrow. He says he will announce the nominee to fill the vacant Supreme Court seat on Saturday. Johnson & Johnson is now the 4th company to begin large-scale clinical trials for a COVID-19 vaccine in the US, behind Moderna, Pfizer, BioNTech, and AstraZeneca. But this one is the first single-dose vaccine, which means it could have speedier results than the other trials. Up to 60,000 volunteers will get the shot. Top administration health officials, including Dr. Anthony Fauci and Centers for Disease Control Director Robert Redfield, testified today before the Senate to discuss the federal response to the pandemic. In his opening statement, Fauci said he believes the country will know by November or December if vaccines currently being developed will be effective.
We feel cautiously optimistic that we will be able to have a safe and effective vaccine, although there is never a guarantee of that.
You know how some birthday parties this year turned into a drive-by celebration? Yeah, we're gonna need something like that for Halloween. The CDC released its guidance for the spooky season. Surprisingly, they didn't say it was canceled, but they did recommend avoiding high-risk activities like haunted houses, hay rides, and any Halloween parties. When it comes to trick-or-treating, you should wrap your candy in individual bags for guests. Pumpkin carving is considered a moderate risk. But there is some good news. Incorporating a mask into your costume is pretty easy, especially for those of you who've been doing the right thing. Which means if you do go to a small outdoor and socially distanced get-together, it won't be weird to have a mask on in pictures. You gotta find the bright spots of 2020, right? This week, the US surpassed 200,000 coronavirus-related deaths, as we said before, the most of any country. As we go into fall, some states are seeing a concerning spike in cases while the country is rolling into peak flu season. Newsy's Lindsay Thies talks to health experts about the concerns of dealing with both at the same time and the things you should already be doing to stay healthy.
We've started fall and flu season is creeping in. Symptoms for COVID-19 and the flu are almost identical, like body and muscle aches. One major difference, COVID patients often lose smell or taste. The same people are at high risk for both.
The elderly, those with secondary medical conditions such as cardiovascular disease, high BMI, etc.
Virologist Andrew Prakash warns that patients with the flu may think they are infected with COVID-19 and search out tests for the coronavirus but not the flu, or vice versa. There may be an option for one test that combines results.
Those tests are, well, number one, they're a bit more expensive, and number two, they're not widely available yet.
Medical institutions and some companies are trying to pair flu and COVID-19 testing so that a lab can test one sample at the same time, but there is concern that testing access issues will make diagnosing either virus more challenging. The flu season is wrapping up in the southern hemisphere, and cases were down this year. But doctors say that isn't a fail-safe for what we can expect here in the U.S.
That doesn't diminish the need to go and get an influenza vaccination to try to limit influenza disease here in the northern hemisphere.
There is some potential that we won't see a terrible flu season, perhaps because people are practicing more social distancing and mask wearing.
So far, scientists have not seen a large number of co-infections when someone gets the flu and COVID-19 at the same time.
There is some data that we're concerned about co-infections, one virus causing an environment within your lungs that makes the other virus easier to infect. But again, much of that is speculation right now.
For now, experts are pushing flu shots, which about half the population gets each year. The American Medical Association has recommended getting a shot before Halloween. Lindsay Thies, Newsy, Denver.
Quick question. When you go in for that first date kiss, do you keep your mask on or mask off?
As the coronavirus has quickly spread across the world,
a freeze on travel has the potential to reshape why people fly.
This halt in traditional entertainment highlights how viewers and creators are coping together.
Healthcare systems in the U.S. will need 3.5 billion masks.
The economic damage looks very different on either side of the Atlantic.
There are only about 117,000 beds nationwide.
So in normal times, dating is already a little awkward, right? There are 1,000 little things to think about leading up to and during the first date. How do I keep their attention without sounding thirsty? Did I get this fit off or do I look weird? Can they hear my heartbeat? Because I'm pretty sure it's at like 200 beats per minute. Now, take all of that and add a pandemic that has turned the way we socialize upside down. Perfect storm of anxiety-inducing activity, right? We wanted to see how dating has changed during the pandemic, partly because we're nosy by trade. So we put out a little survey on modern dating, and here's some of what we found. A sign of the times. Most single folks out there say they would not go on a second date with someone who refused to wear a face covering in public areas. Basically, it turns out most potential partners dig seeing their dates following health guidance and just showing some basic courtesy to the people around them. Just don't try to eat and drink with a mask on, because that really doesn't work. Here's yet another reason to stay informed on COVID. Almost half of all singles dating online say they care about their partner keeping up with current events even more than before the pandemic. So for a good number of folks out there, keeping up with the news really is a turn on, which makes In the Loop a highly informational aphrodisiac. Okay, I'll stop. And this one is a bit more about our political dilemma than our public health crisis, but it turns out people have strong feelings about who you support for president. Who knew? Seriously though, this one kind of stuck with us. About 1 in 3 singles across the country say supporting Joe Biden for president makes a partner more desirable. If that seems low, you should also know that only 14% say support for Trump makes someone more desirable. These numbers are across both men and women, but we also saw in the survey that more men are looking for a Trump-supporting partner, while more women are looking for a partner backing Biden. At a time when politics seem to be about a lot more than just politics, yeah, this kind of makes sense. It shouldn't be a surprise that people have been watching streaming platforms a lot more during this pandemic. Hell, we decided to create a streaming show during this pandemic. Those platforms have been thriving in the 6 months since the pandemic began. As Newsy's Casey Mendoza tells us, everybody winning, but there's one company that's still leagues ahead.
When the pandemic first started, Newsy Ipsos polls from March through June found that more than 30% of respondents consistently said they were watching streaming platforms more often than they typically would. News from the industry echoes those results. HBO Max gained more than 4 million subscribers since it launched in May, Peacock garnered more than 10 million new users in July, and Disney Plus now has over 60 million paying subscribers as of August. That's just a few of the biggest competitors in the streaming space, but even small streaming platforms like Quelly TV and First Look Media's Topic are gaining new users.
We think there's really amazing opportunity in this niche space for consumers as the traditional cable package breaks apart. Sort of like we are unbundling, but we're just reconfiguring the bundle in a slightly different form.
As newer and smaller streaming companies continue gaining new subscribers during the pandemic, one company is still leagues ahead.
Netflix is by far and away the winner for everyone.
We just added 10 million members, which is the largest growth we've ever had in a second quarter.
As Newsy previously reported, Netflix was one of the few global entertainment companies to pivot almost immediately to the social distancing constraints and remote work of the pandemic. Because of that, the streaming company isn't just ahead in subscribers, it's also likely ahead in its productions.
It was really built in order to be flexible, and that kind of flexibility is almost unprecedented in the world.
Erin Meyer is an expert on global business communications, and she recently co-wrote No Rules Rules with Netflix CEO Reed Hastings on the company's culture. She told Newsy that its focus on flexibility in both remote work and travel, as well as its global presence in countries like Japan, Singapore, and Brazil, allowed it to continue working through the pandemic.
I actually think we're going to see a lot more of this in other organizations in the coming decade.
Netflix's slate of original programming is on schedule for the rest of 2020, but as social distancing measures in the US continue, international productions are going to drive what'll be able to come out in the next couple years. Casey Mendoza, Newsy, Chicago.
You know who else has benefited from social distancing? My haters. Before 2018, Florida didn't allow former felons to vote. That changed after the 2018 election, with voters passing a referendum which restored voting rights to more than 1 million former felons. But this year, hundreds of thousands of those potential voters are facing a significant hurdle ahead of this year's election. They'll essentially have to pay to vote. Newsy's Jamal Andrus tells us about how nationwide support for former felons has grown leading up to November.
One of the most important and biggest swing states in the country injected nearly 1.4 million potential new voters into the electorate in November 2018. By passing a referendum, Amendment 4, to give former felons the right to vote, Florida issued the largest expansion of voters since the Civil Rights Act. Now, less than 2 months before Election Day, a federal appeals court judge has ruled in favor of a Florida law that requires former felons to pay back all fines, fees, and restitution before they can vote.
That's what our concern was, the emotional roller coaster that people were being taken on with the ups and downs of this, of the litigation and all of the narratives around this.
No more will our voices be silenced in the state of Florida.
Despite all this uncertainty, the same organization that worked to get voting rights reinstated is doing everything it can to get as many voters as possible to the polls in November. Desmond Meade is the executive director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, which is raising money to pay those fines and fees, not only to expand voters' rights, but to make their mark on a very important election in a very important state.
This is a new constituency group that would force both sides, right, to come to the table to figure out how do we improve people's lives, how do we make our communities safer while still respecting the dignity and the humanity in every citizen.
The cause has caught the attention of athletes, actors, and notably, one of the wealthiest individuals in the country.
By the way, I'm the only candidate in the race who doesn't take a penny in contributions from anyone.
Former presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg has raised $17 million to clear the way for more than 30,000 former felons to vote. Bloomberg said that spending the money to pay off the fines of mostly Black and Hispanic ex-convicts is a, quote, nominal investment to help Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden win Florida, though Meade and the FRRC say they are not trying to help any party in particular. Bloomberg's money will be combined with another $7 million the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition raised from 44,000 individual donations.
The story is much bigger than Bloomberg. It's about, number one, I think the returning citizens that will have an opportunity to participate in the most important election this country has ever seen. And then number two, how American citizens in general is rallying around these returning citizens to make sure that they can create a more inclusive democracy.
This law requiring back fees to be paid was passed by the Republican-controlled state legislature several months after Amendment 4 took effect.
What do we want? Our vote!
And the legal fight over its constitutionality has been going on ever since. Julie Ebenstein from the ACLU was one of the first to file suit.
I don't think that the average voter said, even if someone has finished their sentence, they're off paper, they're back in the community, they're working, they're raising their family, but they have a civil judgment where they owe money that they'll never be able to pay, that somehow those folks should be disenfranchised for life.
Florida's history in presidential elections is well known.
George Bush, governor of Texas, will become the 43rd president of the United States.
In 2000, George W. Bush won the Sunshine State by just 537 votes. In 2016, President Trump took Florida by less than 113,000 votes. According to the ACLU, the law will keep 774,000 potential voters in Florida disenfranchised.
The difference of a few hundred or a few thousand votes can have a huge impact.
Meade advocated for Amendment 4 by traveling all over the state, convincing regular people that former felons deserve the right to vote.
None of those votes was based on hate. None of those votes was based on fear, but rather those votes was based on love, forgiveness, and redemption, right? And I think that any state, any country should want to encourage its citizens to participate in elections, not discourage them.
Jamal Andrus, Newsy, Chicago.
If you have a moment and want to link with us, give us a shout on Twitter using the hashtag NewsyInTheLoop. Standard messaging rates apply, which is nothing because somehow Twitter is still free. We're almost 40 days away from the general election, and there are a myriad of issues concerning voters about the process of actually casting a ballot. For example, thousands of active duty military members who are stationed in one place but claim residence elsewhere will be voting absentee. And as Newsy's Therese Garnier reports, many of them are worried about sending their ballots off and having them counted in such a chaotic election year.
Nearly 3/4 of 1.3 million active duty military are eligible to vote absentee because they are stationed away from their voting residence, and some are concerned the process won't go smoothly this election.
I'm a California resident, and with all the wildfires that are going on right now and the Postal Service already having a backup on delivering items, I think it's going to be really rough for absentee ballots.
Stephanie Simons and her husband moved to Illinois in April. Since then, she says she has not been able to switch her residency from California to Illinois.
Trying to get a license and everything like that has just been hell, basically, with COVID. They keep on pushing back the dates where people can renew their license and stuff and get the what is that, the true ID or whatever.
She is just one of thousands expected to vote absentee this election. While many serving are used to voting absentee, especially when stationed overseas, she says the process this year has been very difficult.
Oh, it's like a 180. So just the different outlook of how easy it was then to how hard it is right now. I don't even know, I can't do anything. So now I am waiting on the absentee ballot.
As seen in these Facebook posts, there are many that are not concerned about voting, whether absentee or in person, but some are very vocal about the rhetoric regarding voter fraud.
The only concern I have is the president actively trying to stop mail-in voting because there has been no problems with it in the past.
Kate Cummings says she voted absentee during the years she was stationed in California.
If they can't take their ballot back in person, my first suggestion would be try to find a friend or a relative that you trust that can. And if you can't do that, you will have to trust the mail, unfortunately. But being fully aware that putting it back in the mail means that President Trump has the chance to affect your ballot because he is affecting the mail system right now.
According to the Federal Voting Assistance Program, the number of active duty military that voted has gone down in recent elections. And the military, as it has done in the past, is fighting to ensure service members and their families have all the tools needed to vote.
A lot of the states are allowing you to email your federal postcard application right into the election office.
Erica Patterson says if service members or veterans are concerned about delays, they can vote online and via mail to make sure their vote is counted.
What I have found is that they have your name somewhere. So say you put in 2 FPCAs and they got your request twice. They would still notate that as 1. And the Federal Voting Assistance Program website does say that if you don't receive your absentee ballot, to fill in a federal write-in ballot. But if you receive your absentee ballot, to still send in that absentee ballot because they're only going to count it once.
Once they have submitted their votes, Patterson encourages everyone to make sure they follow up with their local election office. Many residents across the country are receiving their ballots this week, and with the election just around the corner, the best advice that has been given is to get those ballots in as soon as possible. Therese Garnier, Newsy, Washington.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back for more In the Loop tomorrow, same time, same place. More top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.